Welcome everyone to Melfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 1 Episode 3. It is called Long, Long Time. So full spoilers for the episode. This one had a lot of buzz going in. The early reviews were all saying it was a special episode. And the reaction after the episode has been largely very positive. People have been praising it. That said, that's the majority. I will say there is a fairly, chunk of a minority who don't like it as much, who think it's filler. I've heard that word been thrown around on Twitter. I certainly disagree with that. I think it's a great episode, and I'm hopefully going to try and explain why it's not filler as I'm talking about this. But this is the Bill episode, the which people who played the game were expecting to come up. We knew we were going to Bill's town, and that's a big part of the game. I'll save some of the game comparisons for a little bit later, but this episode does some surprising things. It decides to instead have a little flashback at the start. I was surprised when the opening titles just started playing. It instead started just with the credits, went into Joel and Ellie for a little bit, set up some context, and then we spend the vast majority of the episode in an extended flashback telling the story of Bill and Frank, which is, this romantic, bittersweet story of someone finding someone else and living till the end of their days. And then at the end of the episode, we come back and we do a little bit more with Joel and Ellie and kind of the follow up to it. And as I was watching early on, and it went to the flashback, it has that transition from the mass grave with the fabric to the woman wearing the dress in 2003. And I was thinking, oh, that was a neat transition. But I was wondering, why couldn't this have been at the start, like the other flashbacks? And then obviously it kept going. I went, oh, because it's most of the episode. That's why. But also, I was thinking, I was sort of waiting for that moment to drop where I'm like, okay, what's the point of doing all of this, right? Obviously, it was very good from the get-go. There was a lot of interesting things happening. But it really came out, there was a scene about halfway or so, maybe even a little bit later than that through the episode, where Frank is showing Bill the strawberry patch. And there's a very specific line that I think is the most important line of the entire episode, which is, I was never afraid before you showed up. And that's the moment where it all kind of clicked for me exactly what the point of all this episode was and what the point of this story of Bill and Frank is. The theme of this story of The Last of Us in general is very much about love. It's very much about what you do to keep the person you love around and what you would do as a result of losing that person you love. It's about how you handle those things and how you react to those things. And it's pointed out very specifically by the end of the episode in Bill's letter, but there's a lot of parallels between Bill and Joel. And the story of Bill is a story of someone who was on his own, who wasn't letting anyone in. And it seemed like he was kind of like that before anyway, because he was a bit of a loner prepper guy. But he wasn't letting anyone in, and then he found Frank. And they fall in love. He finally has someone, and how that changes how he is. That line, I was never afraid until you showed up. What he's saying there is that he had nothing to lose before. So he could just be very cold and methodical and didn't have to let any fears of someone not being around anymore cloud his judgments. So it's kind of presenting love as this almost double-edged sword or something like that, where, yeah, you have someone now that you care about, but now you're terrified of losing them. And with Joel specifically, of course, he lost his daughter. There's comparisons made with Tess in this episode by the end about how Tess is the person Joel's supposed to be loving and protecting, but he always kind of kept her at a slight bit of a distance. There's a heavy implication last episode that there was something there, but he never let himself fully succumb to it. And I think part of that is because what he was missing from before wasn't a romantic partner. It was a daughter. A daughter's what he lost. So I think this story is doing a lot of stuff setting up Joel's character and foreshadowing where the story's going to go with him and Ellie. But I also think it's also meant to be this kind of other example of how it can go as well, because it's not like Joel and Ellie's story is going to play out exactly like Bill and Frank. I mean, for a start, it's not a romantic pairing either, but just in the sense of the how where it's going to go, how it's going to end, which obviously I'm not going to talk about here, but maybe a little bit at the end I'll give another spoiler warning for people who have played the games. But I think those comparisons and just everything, again, much like last episode, the thematics are so strong throughout the show where everything feels like it's really focused in examining the same subject. And I felt that here with the story of Bill and Frank. And I think it is kind of ballsy to spend most of the episode telling this story. And this story is not really in the game. The game is very different. You meet Frank. Or sorry, you don't meet Frank. That's the exact opposite. You meet Bill. In the game, Bill's alive and Frank isn't. And there's just hints to what the backstory is. You read a little bit about it. There's little moments of dialogue that kind of reveal what the backstory is. This is by far the biggest departure from the game. And something I was saying a lot last time about changing things for the adaptation because it's a different medium and only certain things are going to work. In the game, you never cut away from your main characters, right? You're always either with Joel or Ellie, pretty much. Other than Joel's daughter at the start. In the show, you have this opportunity to just, and especially since they've established this idea of the flashbacks, as this is kind of the payoff to it almost, where we can just go in full hog into this story and tell it from beginning to end. We tell the story of Bill waiting in his basement, hidden from the military who are evacuating his small town, and coming up, and it's very Dawn of the Dead when he gets out, where he's just sort of like helping himself to all the stores, building his fortress, his fence, his traps, all this stuff. It paints this picture of who this guy is very quickly. And then we skip ahead some time. So he's actually on his own for 3 years, I think it is, before Frank shows up. And there's so many little things, so I'm getting into the Bill and Frank story here, I suppose, proper. There's so many little things in the performances that I think are fantastic in this episode. Some little writing touches that I really appreciate. So when Frank shows up, he sort of falls into Bill's trap, right? He's lucky he didn't trigger one of the flamethrowers or projectile weapons. He just falls into the hole in the ground. And of course, Bill's skeptical, but we hear the voice say, "I'm not infected," and Bill's coming up to see him. Right away in this scene, there's a few little things in the writing and performances that I really enjoyed. One is something that actually, again, parallels directly to Joel and Ellie, is that Frank challenges Bill in a way that is probably quite invigorating for someone who doesn't get challenged or is not used to being challenged. And it's just a silly little thing where when Frank says he's hungry and Bill's telling him to get lost, Bill says, everyone will want a free lunch and I'm not an Arby's. And Frank's like, Arby's was a restaurant, they didn't offer free lunch either. And it's like this point that Bill can't argue with. It's like he just one-upped him and proved that his point made no sense. Obviously we get what he was saying, but like it's a little bit of quick wit. And so much of Joel and Ellie is like Ellie being this quick wit and challenging everything Joel is saying. And she's not always right necessarily, but sometimes she is. And there's a great example at the start of this episode where she does challenge Joel by bringing up that she's not to blame for Tessie's death. And she presents her argument, is very stern about it, and says, no, this is why it's not my fault, because you made these choices. And Joel doesn't make a big song and dance about it, but he does nod to indicate, you're right. I can't argue that. It's not your fault. He agrees with it. And I think there's a big part of this Bill and Frank relationship is Frank opening Bill up to things. And there's little moments here where Frank's in the house having the hot shower and he's like really enjoying it and he's asking for a few more minutes. And Bill says, sure. And he says it quietly at first, but then he realizes that he said it too softly, so he says it louder. Again, maybe a bit of vulnerability coming out by the soft version of his voice. But it was the reaction on his face when Frank says something like, oh, this is amazing, and he's kind of just gleeful about the hot shower, because he's probably not had one in a long time. And the look in Bill's face, in Nick Offerman's face, his performance to that line, really stuck out to me, because it really felt like Bill, not just in the post-apocalypse, not just since the world fell, it really feels like Bill had never really made someone that happy before. Like, this is maybe one of the first times he's ever felt like he's given someone this amount of joy, and he took it, as a thing. Next line that I really like. So the next scene after that is when they're actually sitting down for something to eat, and Bill comes out and he gives him, I think it's rabbit with something, and he's got obviously it's something he's been able to hunt, and he's got wine which he knows what to pair with what, and yeah. Couple of things really stuck out to me in this scene was, one, the line, everything tastes great when you're starving, because Frank's enjoying the food, and he's making it clear that he's enjoying the food. I thought that was a very interesting line in the context of love in this story, in that if you're so deprived of love, like, does it become easier for the right person to come along and kind of like make that connection with you? Not that that's because I don't think Joel and Bill are easy in that sense. They're definitely not. But I couldn't help but sort of notice it, and just the idea that he has been so starved for connection, romantic connection especially. And it seems like not just since the world fell. It sounds like because he's been this gay man for most of his life. He mentions he was with a girl once, and you maybe assume, it was maybe this awkward experience that maybe just either he was trying to force it because he was trying to either deny who he was or pretend he wasn't who he was, or was trying to suppress something, and so he's never really truly opened up to someone, which is what happens over the course of this next couple of scenes. I thought that was great. Him with his guard up, there's a really simple little thing where he goes to sit down and his gun in his holster like sort of hits off the armrest, and it just makes it a little bit awkward for him to sit down. So again, he's not completely let his guard down yet, right? But that was just like a fun little simple visual of showing the situation we're in, is that he's not quite letting himself go yet. But but there's little things that, again, I think makes Bill feel, puts him at ease, that makes him feel like maybe Frank is connecting to him, that maybe he feels something. Something as simple as when Frank goes over to the piano and he starts looking through the music, he says, who's this? This is not you. This is not the music you like. And he says it's his mother's, but he hits one of the music, the songbooks, and he's like, no, this is you, this one. And everything that follows in the scene kind of proves that he's right. That this is like one of the songs, or one of the sort of pieces of music that Bill does like and would play. This is his personality. And Bill probably feels seen. And that goes out as well before when he pours the wine, and Frank points out, you know how to pair what wine with what food. And Bill says, I know I don't seem like the type. And Frank says, yeah, you do. So again, I think Bill's feeling seen by Frank in a way that he's never felt seen before. So there's this like chipping away at his like tough demeanor to kind of get to that connection. And notably, Bill gets very protective when Frank starts butchering his song. He's like, no, this is mine. Don't ruin it, please. Like, so Frank opens the door and says, okay, well, play it for me. You do it. And sure enough, he does this great little performance. It's a really soft piano piece, and he's singing about love. And this is him truly vulnerable, and maybe the best performance of the entire episode is the moment where Frank's leaning in for the kiss, and the look of like fear on Bill's face, and not fear in that he doesn't want it to happen way, but in the nervousness of it, the like, this is like a new scary experience for him. And then even the way that his body language is, like when they're actually standing up kissing, and then Frank says, what's your name? Because Bill's not told him that. Bill's kept it to himself. And the way he says Bill, he feels like a teenager who's like, I don't know, like he is scared, but he's kind of starting to get nervously into it. And I think all these little beats in the performance really paint the picture of who Bill is as a character, and that he is so scared of letting anyone in, and partly because he's maybe felt closed off. Part of the reason why he maybe became this weird survival prepper in the first place is because he was hiding who he truly was and didn't feel like he could let anyone in, so he had to feel like he could take care of himself. And it goes to the ultimate extreme of being this prepper with a wall full of guns and being all this self-sufficient kind of character, because he doesn't think he can rely on anyone else. He has to be able to do everything himself. So that is like your first big meaty chunk of that story is the 2007 section we're in just now. 2003 was just the montage of building the fortress effectively. No, all of this was just beautiful, and it set you up and made it all feel very kind of authentic and natural. And this was like, the condensed version of this love forming. Romantic in this case. Obviously, when we're talking about Joel and Ellie, we're not talking about romantic love, because, well, one, that would be disturbing, but that's very much father-daughter kind of like connection that's forming, and we see the hints of that throughout this episode repeatedly, which I'll get to. But to stick with Bill and Frank, for now we skip ahead a few years to, I think it's 2010, the next part, and once again we're seeing how Frank affects Bill, because they're fighting about, Frank wants to paint the house, he wants to like do up some of the stores that are nearby and like sort of fix them up, and Bill's like, what's the point? He's angry because he doesn't feel like wasting resources on it because they're not necessary. And Frank's like, no, like, this is about expressing things, this is about living rather than just surviving, it's about enjoying things, it's about, showing and sharing love. And that word comes up again. I mean, it's a word that comes up in every story ever, but like, it's specifically the theme of The Last of Us. Bill's scared of letting anyone else in, and part of that might be that if he lets anyone else in, does that put in danger this neat little bubble that's just him and the person he loves? And that's certainly something I think is also a subject to The Last of Us, is this idea, if you've got this tight pairing of characters, is there a fear of like even letting anyone, especially in this harsher world where anyone could be dangerous? I mean, this episode properly introduces the idea of dangerous people, not just infected, but people that are around, raiders as they call them. So the idea that if they let someone in, it could be someone that will betray them, that will take advantage of them. If nothing else, it's showing Bill's trust issues for a start. So this leads to Joel and Tess, and we find out that they know each other because Frank was talking to Tess on the radio. Tess and Joel come here under the hopes of being able to trade certain things with them. They can get them certain supplies that Bill can't find in any small town, and Bill can supply them with other things. We find out this is how the radio thing gets set up with the music and all that stuff. But Bill and Joel are a lot alike. Joel kind of points out that he'd be just like him, with his uneasiness. That's all very good. But again, Frank challenges Bill. Bill's like yelling, no, don't take anyone in the house, but he just walks in with Tess anyway. And it's not this like big huge moment of defiance. It's the idea that Frank is just confident enough that he can just kind of ignore Bill and he'll get away with it, and Bill will just accept it. And the idea that he needs that challenge in his life, and that he needs the other person to challenge him. And this is maybe the interesting comparison between this romantic relationship between two adults and the potential father-daughter relationship between Joel and Ellie, is that perhaps because they are both adults, and because Frank is equal in that sense. What am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is that maybe there's a bit of an awkward power dynamic when it's an adult and a child, right? Even as tough as Ellie is and as smart as Ellie is, maybe the love imbalance or the power imbalance in that relationship, because one is the adult making the choices and the other one doesn't have as much choice, it leads to some different outcomes than when you have two adults and one is sort of, and they met as adults and one can equally challenge the other. It's just a thought I've had just now, but I think it does kind of apply in some ways. It's maybe something curious to think about and look out for with some of the differences between the relationships. But what I did note here is that Joel does kind of use Frank a little bit in the conversation, because he's basically saying, we can trade this, your fence is starting to corrode, you need more wire, blah blah blah. And he says, we can give you enough that'll last the rest of your life. And then he pauses and says, lives. And it's I wouldn't say it's malicious per se, but it is a little bit like he's using the fact that Bill cares about Frank to influence his decision. This is not just about yourself. This is about keeping the person you care about safe. And you can read it just kind of like what comes up at the end in the letter is that Bill and Joel are kind of similar enough that Joel recognizes that because he would care about protecting someone, that he recognizes that Bill would too. So he's like meeting him on kind of similar ground. Or you could say that he's maybe just slightly exploiting like a weakness by trying to convince him to work with him. Not that Joel's going to betray him, not that Joel, he does just want to trade goods because he needs certain things, but you could say that he's been a little bit, just a little bit manipulative in how he's pushing to make it work. And he brings up the danger of the Raiders before they leave as well. So, yeah, interesting little stuff. It was kind of nice to see Tess again, obviously just after we had our big dramatic death last episode. It reminds you of her, it brings her up again. Obviously she was mentioned at the start of the episode. We then skip ahead to 2013. This is where the strawberry scene happens, and again, simple little thing here is that Frank makes Bill better, right? He makes him healthier, he makes him happier, and one of the key little details here that I love is that he said he traded with Joel and Tess one of Bill's guns for some strawberry seeds. And of course Bill immediately said, what? Which gun? Right? But there's this beautiful thing here that when he tries the strawberries that he's grown, Frank's kept this a secret, and he presents him these strawberries and he gives him one. The little childlike giddy laugh that Bill has when he's tasting this strawberry is like pure joy. It's pure happiness. And I just love the idea that Frank took something of Bill's, which was, this weapon, this thing for violence, this thing that is purely cold, cynical, and about protection. And I'm not saying people in this world don't need the firearms, because obviously they do. But he took a little bit of that anger and coldness, and he traded it for something that would make him happy. And that's why Frank is needed in Bill's life. And why he completes him in a way that no one else has. I think that's just a simple little beautiful thing. And then you get the like I say, the important line of the episode, which is, I was never afraid before you showed up. And now because he has something to lose. But if he has something to lose, then it means life is worth living. I would maybe put forth. So the big attack happens where Raiders do try and come. A lot of them get taken out with traps. There's flamethrower traps and all sorts. Bill is just standing there with his rifle, just taking shots. And it is interesting because obviously knowing the game and expecting Bill to live and for Joel and Ellie to interact with Bill, this felt like it was almost a scene that was either going to completely throw the game audience for a loop by having Bill die instead of Frank, or maybe it was like a red herring to make audiences who hadn't played the game think that Bill was going to die and then it was going to switch up by having Frank die instead. Obviously it goes in a completely different direction for both audiences by the time the story ends, but he's saying, when Bill thinks he's dying, he gets shot, he says, go to Joel, he'll take care of you. He's recognizing that Joel's also a protector, and in some way would hope that Joel would do the job for him if he's not here. But it is interesting that it's Bill might have stayed out there and died again if Frank wasn't there to pull him inside. Bill's saying to Frank, get inside, it's not safe for you, you're not trained for this or whatever. I don't even know if Bill's trained per se, but he's certainly been prepping for it all his life. But Frank's like, no, I'm taking you inside. He carries him on his shoulder into the house, and it's very tense because you're thinking that either one of them could keep getting shot during this moment. But he brings him inside, and again he kind of keeps him alive. And Bill's basically given up on the table; he's dying. And Frank's like, "No, you're here with me. You're going to live." And we skip ahead 10 years. We skip ahead to 2023, and they're older men. And if I have a slight complaint, I have two maybe slight complaints about this episode, and they're very slight. One is that the old age makeup and grey beards, making actors look old and stuff can sometimes just feel a little bit fake, and I think there's a little bit of that here. And honestly, the only other thing that I would say I don't like about the change from the games and how it handles the story of Bill and Frank would be that it's a shame we don't get to see Bill interact with Ellie, because some of their exchanges in the game when they're bantering, because Ellie kind of really fights back against Bill, is really entertaining, and it's a shame we didn't get that in the show. But like, this is a great example of doing something different but keeping the essence, like the outcome, the thematic importance of Bill's backstory to the story of Joel and Ellie is actually even stronger in the show versus the game, because instead of like going through a gameplay section, we get this story that really fleshes out what that story is, and we can see all these neat little parallels with the main story beyond just the broad stroke of he cared about someone and he lost them, and this is what it does to him and what it's turned him into. You know, like that works in the game really well, but here it goes a few steps further with this particular segment. So yeah, so we see that Frank is ill. He's in a wheelchair. It's never confirmed exactly what is wrong with him or what his exact illness is. I think I saw something online, the creators were going for something like MS or something to that extent, which, you know, is a bit of a personal touch for me because my father had MS. And I could kind of see it. Like, you know, as soon as I heard that, I sort of thought about the scenes in the episode. I went, yeah, okay, I can kind of recognize some similarities. But Frank's sick, and we see him struggling. Bill has to help him move around. He has to put him to bed. He has to take pills. You know, which you presume that he's getting from Joel and Tess. They're trading to get these pills. But he's basically made this choice that he wants to die. Frank has made the choice that he wants to have one last good day and go. And Bill, of course, is like terrified of this. He doesn't want this to happen. He cries. He begs him not to. And Frank tries to say that this is my choice. You know, I've had, you know, bad days. I've had bad days with you, but I've had more good days with you than anyone else. So please give me one more good day and let me go out on my terms. And I think how you feel about this decision that Frank is making maybe depends on how you feel about you know, euthanasia in general, you know, and assisted suicide and things like that. But the way I was kind of taking this in the episode is I don't think Frank wanted to just commit suicide behind Bill's back and have Bill find him. I think for the sake of the story, it's important that Frank gives Bill the forewarning, and he asks him obviously to help and participate, but I think that the asking him to help, and in this story in particular, is about having Bill on some level accept that this is Frank's choice, and he wants to, you know, he's had you know, they've spent, I think, what they met in 2007, so yeah, they've had like 16 years together now, and he wants to end his life rather than live in misery for however long he's got left. And I think the idea of Bill being let in this decision and being explained to why he's making this decision, like, I can kind of understand why Frank wants to do that and why he thinks that's fairer to Bill than just doing it behind his back and having Bill just discover his body. But especially since in this case, it gives Bill his chance to also choose something, which he does. He chooses he wants to die with Frank, and he doesn't want to live without him. And it's this very sad, sweet, but very sad ending where they die together. You know, he takes him up to bed after they both drink the wine with the crushed up pills in it, and they die together in bed, which is interesting. Actually, an interesting point from the game here is that this is actually combining something else in the game. It's just a small moment, but in the game, I think it's before you get to the Bill stuff, maybe a little bit later. It may actually be after that I'm thinking about it. But there is a scene in the game where you're just going through a house, and it's not a big moment on its own, but you find like a dead couple in a bedroom, and I think it's clear that they've committed suicide together. I think this was an interesting little way of, like, clearly they liked that idea, and they've combined that with the Bill story, which was, you know, a separate thing in the game. So I think that's a really interesting little combination there that they've done with this. Yeah, I think, especially when you look at the themes of the show as a whole, and the idea of someone who loves someone else making choices without the other's permission or without the other's even knowledge of making that choice is a big theme of this story. So I think Frank giving Bill the heads up effectively and allowing Bill to make his own choice to go along with that, I think is going to be a big deal thematically as the story goes on. So I may even talk a little bit more about this at the end after I give another spoiler warning. But I get this. I get these decisions being made, and I do think it's quite sweet in the moment. Especially since, again, it's not like they're getting to go to hospitals. It's not like they're getting any sort of help. You know, they're on their own. He makes this choice, and yeah, it's his choice to make, fundamentally, I think. So that's the end of the Bill and Frank story. And, you know, obviously I didn't talk about Ellie and Joel's early stuff yet. I wanted to kind of like do all Bill and Frank's first and then come back to our two lead characters. So to go back to the start of the episode, Joel's building a little monument from Tess. I have heard some critiques of people who know the area, that this location, this forest mountainy area, it claims to be 10 miles outside of Boston. Apparently people who know that state or whatever think that's nonsense, but whatever, I don't care. I could not give a shit. But I get it. So yeah, I already mentioned Ellie saying it's not her fault for Tessie's death, and she makes her strong case, which Joel agrees to. But when they're walking to Bill's, you know, it teases that Joel's worried about other people. He's not looking for infected per se, but he's more concerned about people. But the big thing is that they get to this small diner where Joel's got some stuff stashed. And this is actually a scene that kind of takes place in the game in Bill's town, where they're in like a small diner in there. And there's some direct lifts with Ellie being excited about the video game, the arcade machine. It's a made up game in the video game Last of Us, but here it's Mortal Kombat 2. But she has this kind of intimate moment where she goes like hunting for stuff in the back, and she ends up in the basement, and she finds some tampons, which I imagine are quite a find in the post-apocalypse. And there's an infected sort of trapped under some rubble. You know, it's a scary moment at first when you hear the noise, but it's trapped. And Ellie goes over and she pulls out her knife and she slices a little bit of the infected's head, and there's no blood coming out. It's, you know, it's very different. And then it ends with her stabbing the infected in the head to kill it. I think my main note with this is that this is probably Ellie's first kill of any kind. Like, it's an infected, but I think it's kind of an interesting little moment here that she gets to look this infected in the eyes, and the infected arguably even looks a little bit scared in the moment, and kind of reminds us that these were once people. You know, it's really keeping that sad part of it there, even though I'm never going to necessarily critique about anyone killing infected in a zombie-like story, but I get why we have this moment in the weight of her killing something. And I think it's especially notable because she's been asking for a gun. That's like a running thing throughout this episode. She keeps asking for one. So seeing her first kill at this is really interesting. And I think it being separate from Joel is also a very interesting take on, again, if we're doing like a surrogate father, surrogate daughter kind of story here, it's the idea that like he can be there to teach her many things, and we'll see some examples of that in the episode. But there's going to be these moments that are just her own, these like self-experiences that the parental figure's not around for, and it's this thing that she's going to have to like remember and live with, you know, for better and for worse, whatever it may be. So I thought that was a really interesting little touch. But yeah, this is where like we really start to get Joel and Ellie as like what, you know, they really start to feel like the pairing of characters, in the sense that they come across this plane that's crashed into a hill, and Ellie starts getting excited. Holy shit, it's a plane. And she's like, you ever flew in one of those? Oh man, you got to be in the sky. That's so cool. And Joel's doesn't care. He's like, what? It's not that impressive. It's just a plane. But she has grown up after the apocalypse. She's never been in a plane. She thinks it sounds cool. And I think Joel witnessing this, seeing this sort of, because Ellie's been kind of tough. She's swearing a lot. She's fighting back. This is her actually acting more like a kid. She's getting excited over a plane. And it's right after this scene where they're walking down the road. And there's a little bit more. Actually, yeah, it's right after this where Ellie asks some questions about how the apocalypse happened. She asks about the pandemic. She asks about how the infected spread. And she says a couple of rumors that she's heard. And for the first time, Joel really kind of like offers an answer. not specifically to this question, but just in general, the idea that he's willing to engage in the conversation. He's not avoiding it. He does try to act. He tries to teach her. He tries to give her the information that he knows, and he talks about how people think it was spread via like common food supplies like flour and things like that, and that's how it spread so quickly. But she thanks him for him telling her this, and he just sort of awkwardly says sure. But he offers this up. It's kind of like this is the first kind of like connection moment he really gives with her, and I think it's interesting that it comes right after he's seen her act more like a child, where he like maybe the fathering instincts maybe kick in just a little bit more, and then right after this he shows like father-like concern. They're walking down the road and he says, oh, we should cut through here in the forest, and she says, why? And he says, there's something up ahead I don't think you should see. And that's, I'd like to think that most adults would maybe not want the kids to see the mass grave of skeletons, which obviously transitions us into the flashback stuff, but it does show this sign of concern. He cares a little bit now. He's caring a little bit that she shouldn't see that. It's maybe, again, the first little sign of that popping in. So... And obviously what we find out here is really sad as well, is that some people were evacuated from the towns and were just killed because there was no room in the quarantine zones. And they were killed because if they remained alive, they could become infected. So they'd rather lower the amount of infected they'll have to deal with later by just killing them now. It's really cold. It's really lacking of anything, like empathy or love. So again, like I think a lot of this, like not losing your humanity, is a big theme as well in The Last of Us, obviously, and it is in most zombie stories. And because I think that's the thing with the infected and the idea of the virus, is that love is kind of like it. I don't know if I've mentioned this much on the reviews yet, but this idea that once you catch love for someone, you'll never be the same again. Like it'll always be there in some form, even if it goes really badly and you end up hating them. You'll still feel strongly for them when their memories evoked. You'll never just not care. They'll never just be a stranger again. You'll feel something, whether it's still love or it turns into hatred. You'll always feel something. And once you've changed and once you have that feeling inside you, there's nothing you can do about it, and it changes you. So I think the virus kind of, in many ways, like is the perfect on the surface plot for a story that's talking about dealing with feelings that change you, that you can't fight back against. Love's obviously a much better thing, but I think the parallels there are quite interesting to look at. So when we come back after all this, and Joel and Ellie are arriving at Bill's place, and they go in the fence, they go in the house. One of the things I love in the game is there's a lot of exploring of houses, and there's a lot of exploring of just places where people have been, and you get a lot of those moments where you find like a dead couple in a bed, and you'll read a note about who they were. You'll just discover the aftermath of who certain people were, and I think a lot of that is in this scene, which is like they go into the house and there's the plates where they had dinner before they committed suicide. There's the piano. There's things around. There's these relics of the love that they had for each other, still kind of lingering in this house, kind of lasting after the fact. And it has this kind of like what once was vibe to it. And it's really interesting that we got to see the story play out, but then we get to see Joel and Ellie walk in and just see what this house is like a little bit later, when it's had a little bit of time to settle, and you can sort of feel that there was something here before, and all these little relics of who these people were are there, and all these little items that we're looking at mean something to us because we saw their story, and how little it means to Joel and Ellie. Although Ellie, I think does note some of these things. She's looking at them, she's sort of taking them in. It's this idea of echoes of who people were after they're gone. I thought it was a really just atmospheric thing that I really liked. But we have to talk about the letter. That's the big thing, is that Bill has left a letter for whoever, but probably Joel. And Ellie reads it out. Obviously, there's some stuff explaining what they've done and whatnot, but he's left stuff for Joel. Here's the key. Here's the code for the thing, blah, 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 blah. But the big part of it, which obviously everyone really cares about, and I'm just going to read this verbatim because I wrote it down. But I guess part of the reason why this episode took a bit longer to get to is because I actually watched it a second time and took notes because I felt I should. So the letter eventually gets to this. I used to hate the world and I was happy when everyone died, but I was wrong because there was one person worth saving. That's what I did. I saved him and I protected him. That's why men like you and me are here. We have a job to do. And God help any mother effer who gets in our way. And then obviously it goes on to say, make sure you protect. And Ellie stops speaking, and obviously it was going to say Tess, which is confirmed. And Joel goes outside and looks at the letter, and it obviously hits him that he's failed to do that. And maybe this idea that he never fully connected to Tess in the way that Bill did to Frank is also something that's making him feel guilty here, and something that's kind of driving how he feels. But there's a couple of little things in there that I are really big foreshadowing and thematic points for the show and for the story of these characters. This idea of like your purpose being to protect the one person you care about is a big part of this. And this idea of God help any mother effer who gets in our way is also very important. And we've already seen Joel be violent. We've already seen that people are scared of Joel finding out that Tess was hurt in episode 1. The idea that he does have a reputation for being dangerous if you cross him. These are seeds that are being planted. These are things that are adding to the themes of the story and setting up where we're going for there. But yeah, of course, outcomes are going to be different, and of course, we're going different places. But the story of Bill and Frank was very much another example of this type of character and how it can go. And I think seeing how it then differs and where Joel will succeed and fail when thinking about these choices and how it compares to Bill and Frank will be a fascinating thing to compare back to as we go through this story. So yeah, so they prepare to leave. Ellie still wants a gun, and she does steal one. She finds one in a drawer and puts it in her bag for later. So we've got a literal Chekhov's gun at play with Ellie. And it's interesting that Ellie, when they realize they've got an hour left because Joel's like charging a battery, she's like, "Oh, they've got hot water. I'm going to take a shower." I think that's an interesting, again, little connection to the Bill and Frank story, because that was the first thing that Frank was able to enjoy and appreciate that sort of made Bill sort of not happy, but certainly sort of go, "Oh, I've made this person's life happier. I've made this person's life better right now. I've given them this joy." So I think it's interesting to go back to that again. That Ellie's going to go in and use the shower, but then she cracks a joke about, Joel, you need to take a shower because you stink, and he sort of like shoots her this look. And this really stuck out to me because this felt a lot like Sarah. This felt like, even earlier actually, when he was talking about the food supplies, he mentioned pancake mix. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Sarah was making him pancakes in the first episode for his birthday. But, her like kind of like being this kid who's going to start taking care of him in a way, like obviously he's very good at a lot of things and he's very capable, but there's certain like self-care things that he doesn't do and he forgets. And Sarah, we saw, we saw her kind of step in to remind him to do certain things and kind of take care of him in ways that he wasn't. And it feels like Ellie in this little exchange kind of has stepped into that role in a little bit, and in a jokey way where she's like cracking a little joke, but it works, right? And then of course the childlike glee that Ellie has when they get in the truck it's adorable, for one, because she's like just touching things and she's like, "Oh, it's like a spaceship," and he's like, "You've never been in a car before." So it's very amusing. It's kind of sweet, but there's again lots of great details here. There's the little moment where Ellie touches the side mirror and it's on her, right, and she's very well lit. And when she turns the mirror, it like sort of turns to like reveal Joel looking at her, but he's in complete shade, right? So again, it's going back to that idea from last episode where she was sitting in the light and Joel and Tess were in the darkness on the other side of the frame. This was almost kind of the same thing. here. It was almost a jump scare the way it sort of turned and revealed him. It wasn't to the characters in the scene, but for a visual scare for the audience, it was almost a jump scare. But the big thing here, though, is that once they start driving, Ellie like finds a tape in the glove compartment and she puts it in the radio. Actually, no, before I even get to that, the seatbelt. God, I was talking about Joel being a father figure. Jesus. Like, he says, put on your seatbelt, and she just doesn't know what he's talking about. So he has to lean over and pull it out. So he has to get close to her. He has to sort of, it's like, again, it's a very, like, parent-kid thing where you're sort of, like, putting the seatbelt on for them. It's a very parental-style moment where he's teaching her something. And I think maybe he's not realised how much, like, he wasn't done teaching a child something because he only got so far with his own daughter. But he reacts to this song. Ellie puts the song in, and she's going to turn it off, but he's like, no, leave it on. He recognizes the song, and he's like, well, you don't know who this is? And she's like, of course I don't know who this is. And what really stood out to me here is that you can actually see Joel smiling a little bit. The camera's from behind both the characters at this point. We're kind of looking over the shoulder at both of them. But he's clearly, you can just see from the side of his face that he's smiling a little bit. And Ellie is also smiling, so there's like genuine bonding going on here over the music. And what I also noted here is that they're both bathed in sunlight. It's like, very quickly, Joel did the little fatherly thing of helping her put the seatbelt in, and then they go out, she's put in the music, and all of a sudden he's not in the darkness anymore. He's in the sunlight with her. This felt like a really subtle like transition for the characters here, where this relationship is somewhat changed just based on the last couple of minutes of this episode. And I really like that. And then the last thing of the episode is the last shot is like through the bedroom window, looking at them driving away from where Bill and Frank will be. And again, it's that the idea of the echoes of the people who were there before. You see a painting that Frank did on the wall, and you also get this sense of it's slowly, it takes a long time, but when it eventually shifts focus to the inside of the bedroom with the curtains, this is maybe a silly observation, but you almost feel like the wind blowing the curtains almost feels a little ghostly. I'm not suggesting there's actual ghosts literally there. I'm just saying it's kind of evoking this idea that their presence still lingers in some way. And not only that, but the idea that Bill and Frank's bedroom window is literally framing Joel and Ellie as they leave. It's a frame of the story, which sets us up to where we're going next. So I really like that. Obviously, the plot details that I just sort of I went over, sort of skipped over. Partly because this was another game comparison, but obviously it's important for the show, the plot-wise, is that we know Joel wanted to go to his brother's anyway. He thinks he might be in trouble in Wyoming, so he's like, hey, Ellie, I'm going to see my brother. Bill and Frank aren't here anymore. If I take you with me, his brother Tommy used to be a Firefly. He might know where the Fireflies are so that we can get you to them. And they can take you to this hospital to, do the treatments and try and cure the world, whatever. The game comparison is less of a comparison and just more of a pointing out that the dialogue for a lot of this scene where he says this is very, very much taken from the game. Particularly the part about the rules, where he says, if I take you with me, these are the rules. You don't bring up Tess, you do what I say, and whatever the third one was. And then her saying, yeah, what you say goes. Like, that exchange is verbatim out of the video game. Really good stuff. Some of the stuff with the plane was as well, I think, now that I'm thinking back to it. But that was a cool little moment, because it felt like a really important turning point in the game as well. So, and it does here too, because this is him committing to take her one step further. And then, of course, the actual bonding in the car over the music and the seatbelt, and him actually having a moment of happiness. Which is dangerous, because now maybe he'll be scared of losing those moments of happiness. Not that I think he's completely committed to Ellie yet, or he's made the choice to stick around with Ellie completely yet, but that is the path that we're on. That is the path that we're traveling through with the characters. So another little line from the game that popped up earlier on is when they're in the diner, and Ellie says, "Is there anything bad in here?" And he just replies with, "Just you." That is an exchange from the game as well. I couldn't even tell you exactly what part of the game that comes up in, but it's definitely in there. So, no, I thought this was a fantastic episode. I thought all the thematic parallels with the between Bill and Frank's story and what Joel and Ellie's story is becoming, and the idea of what you do for love, your fear of losing that love, and the lengths you'll go to keep it, or possibly what you'll do after it's lost. Like, those ideas are there, and the comparisons between those characters, and Bill and Frank ultimately have quite a sweet, sad but sweet ending. And you're kind of left happy that Bill and Frank found each other and got to spend this time together. It's it's kind of a touching romance episode, bizarrely. I actually do have one other minor complaint, and it's not. This is less a complaint in a vacuum and more just in the greater context of like everything else. And what I mean by that is that, so when Bill agrees to spend this last day with Frank, by going to get the outfits, having dinner, and getting married. I didn't mention that part. He wants to get married, which I saw a great thing on Twitter actually about this, is that gay marriage in the US didn't start becoming legal anywhere until after 2003. So in this world of the show, gay marriage was never legalized. So that kind of even adds a little extra touch to this choice of them giving themselves a wedding before Frank is going to die. So it does paint this different world, which again also reminds me of one of the funnier lines in the episode. You think the government are all Nazis, like, or they're not Nazis, they're all fascists, and Bill says they are all fascists, and Frank goes, well, yeah, now, but not then. I thought that was funny. I thought that was a little bit funny. Anyway, so when they're doing this though, a Max Richter song starts playing. It's a very famous Max Richter song, and I love the track. It's a great piece of music. It did take me out of the scene a little bit though, just because it's been used in a lot of things. Not because it's bad or because it doesn't fit the moment. It's excellent, and I think it works well in the scene. But it's used at the start and the end of Arrival, the Denis Villeneuve movie. It was used in Castle Rock, and I think I've heard it in at least one other thing, and I can't remember what. But it's been used enough now that it kind of like, instead of like being swept up by the music, going into the emotion, my mind went, oh, it's that Max Richter song. And like, it just, I don't know, like, it's just a little overused perhaps. There's a slight critique there, but it's a fairly minor quibble, but by all means. So no, really good. But no, I thought the parallels between the two stories were fantastic, and I think this will. I think the more the story plays out, the more looking back, this is going to feel like a great sort of bit of foreshadowing, or even foreshadowing. That's maybe not even the right word, but just a good narrative counterpoint to a lot of the things that are going to go down. And yeah, it was a very sweet episode. So I think I'm going to give like a small spoiler warning here for people who haven't played the games, particularly the first game. I want to talk a little bit about just so yeah, okay, yeah. So spoilers for the game, right? I'm going to talk about something later on in the game now. So if you're only watching the show, you've never seen the game, thank you for joining me. I will see you soon. This is the first time I want to do this. I think so much of this, what this episode sets up with the idea of like, particularly that line about God help any mother effer who gets in our way. I couldn't not think of the ending of the game when this came up. So again, spoilers for people who have not played the game, right? Seriously. The section at the end of the game where you're in the hospital and you find out what they're going to do to Ellie, and you find out that it's going to kill her. And Joel, of course, is determined to get to her and save her. And you go through this part where you're just working through all these like Firefly soldiers, and you're just taking them out, like you're just suddenly John Rambo because you need to save Ellie. You need to get to her. It made me think of that. It made me think of that and this idea of like just the hell that Joel will incur on people, the wrath that he will go through by the end of the story to protect Ellie. Right, so obviously you've got that there, but it was one of the things that I really love about Last of Us the game is that I love how that like uses the idea that it's interactive at the end. one of the things that's most impressive and sticks with me about that first game is that in that last section, when Joel's determined to get to Ellie, I don't just sympathize with Joel. I don't just empathize with him, and I don't just like understand why he feels the way he does. The game has done this thing where I feel exactly the same way he does, where I was motivated to get to Ellie. I was like, damn it, I'm saving her, I don't give a shit. And that's kind of the beauty of the interactivity of a video game, if you do the story well enough. And up until that point, I don't think any video game had ever made me feel that way, where my motivations felt like they were the exact same as the characters. It wasn't me empathizing with him, I felt those things. I felt like me and Joel were one for the briefest of moment. And that was kind of beautiful. And it's not a beautiful section, it's a very tense and thrilling, and like, you're kind of sweating a little bit, you're worried that you're not going to fail, all these things. And I was so determined that there was nothing stopping me from beating the game at that point. Like, you're so motivated. Like, it's one thing to just want to finish the game and get through the enemies so you roll credits. It's another thing to feel motivated in the story that you have to accomplish the thing, because you won't settle until you do. That's spectacular. And it did make me think about how the show is going to adapt that, because it's definitely going to have that section, and I can see it being, like, I can see Joel almost being like John Goddamn Wick, in the show, when it presents him trying to get to Ellie to save her, unless they scale it back for the sake of not having as much action. I don't know if they'll do that, maybe they will, I don't know, but it did make me excited though. Like, that line got me excited, and it's that weird thing where not every choice Joel makes, of course, is good, and Joel in a lot of ways is not a healthy character, right? There's definitely part of the story of this entire thing is analyzing the bad choices that Joel makes out of love for someone, right? But how much of a bastard that he's going to be to try and keep that and not lose it, and maybe the selfish side of it and things like that. But I think the game does such a good job of putting you into his shoes, and you've bonded with Ellie over the course of the game that you need to save her and you need to do all this. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the show adapts that and makes you feel everything in the moment. Like, is it going to achieve the same thing where you want Ellie to live, regardless of though technically the right thing to do might not be to let her live? Because not letting her live might cure the world. But does the world matter to you if you have to lose the person you love for it? It's a really interesting question, and I really like all this like sprung into my mind when that line in the letter was read, and of course all that other stuff he said about finding that one person and protecting them, and that giving him a sense of purpose. Like, the idea that gives you a sense of purpose, especially that, okay, now I've got a reason to be on this earth. Now I've got a reason to get up in the morning. I've got a reason that drives me, and the reason that drives me is this other person, which in some ways is a lot of pressure to put in that other person if they ever kind of like start to realize this, that they are that important. Like, it can be, obviously in a romantic context, it can be like, oh, I feel needed and that feels great, but it could also feel like a lot of pressure to live up to what this other person sees in you, and there's a lot of like different ideas in there that are really great. So I wanted to bring that up because it just my mind just jumped to the later parts of the story when the letter said that. But anyway, that has been me. Thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. I'll wrap up quickly because I have talked for a long time about this episode. You can support all the content over at patreon.com/MaileFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your troubles, or you can send in a super thanks on YouTube if you like instead. You can, of course, like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All those things help out a lot. Get Mailed Fuzz on Twitter at mailed_fuzz for channel updates for this channel. You can get me on Twitter at Wibble89. But otherwise, that is me. Thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?